Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today, we're going to be looking at the European Union, a very important organization. My guest today is an expert on the Union. Dr. Desmond Dinan is a professor of public policy in the Schar School of Policy and Government, and he holds the Jean Monnet Chair in European Public Policy at George Mason University. He's been an advisor to the European Commission in Brussels, and he is a visiting fellow at the Netherlands Institute for International Relations in The Hague. His most recent book is A Concise History of the European Union. Dr. Dinan, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Bill, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
I appreciate you being with me today. Let's start off with a very basic question. Why was the EU formed? How many members did it have at the beginning? How many does it have today?
The EU was formed to help its members to improve their economic prospects and also to enhance their security, but I would say soft security because it's not a military organization like NATO, although it is acquiring a military capacity, and we can perhaps talk about that in a minute. It emerged out of three organizations that were established in Europe right after the Second World War. Those were called the European Communities. And the European Communities originally had 6 member states. They grew over time, and they grew not only in membership, but they grew also in policy scope. In other words, they acquired more and more responsibilities for the kinds of policies that we generally associate with individual countries, including, by the way, economic integration and especially monetary union. And as the European Communities developed both in size and policy scope, they changed into the European Union. So the European Union was launched in the early 1990s in the context of the profound changes that were happening both in Europe and globally at that time. I'm referring to the end of the Cold War, the independence of the countries in Central and Eastern Europe, German unification, but also globalization and the acceleration of economic integration that was happening, as I said, globally and regionally. So that was the genesis of the European Union, which came into existence in 1993, and since that time has grown even more in size because the countries of Central and Eastern Europe have joined. But something else has happened, Bill, which is interesting, and that is a country has left. The United Kingdom has left.
Mm-hmm.
So the size of the European Union grew to 28. It has diminished somewhat. It's 27, still a large number of countries, but not including the United Kingdom. But I would say that the EU is it's really relevant to its member states as it was at the beginning for their economic well-being and for their security.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned one country that withdrew. We think of the Brexit, Britain exiting the EU, and it was a big deal in the UK and well, really all throughout Europe and really come right down to it around the world.
Exactly.
I look back on that, it seems to me like with so many elections, that there was voter remorse, that so many of the people who opted out of Brexit, they wanted to get out of the EU, regretted it, and even almost the next day, because promises were made that billions of pounds were going to be devoted to the National Health Institute and what have you in the UK. And then the people who said that said, no, that's not the case. Basically, they lied to them. That's exactly what happened. But what is the status today? Has it been a positive for the UK exiting Brexit? Are there people would they like to get back into the European Union, or where are we today?
I would say that the experience of Brexit, and it was a very long process because we know the referendum took place in June of 2016, but it took 5 years for the United Kingdom to exit the European Union. Brexit as an event happened only in 2020. And I think you're right. During that time, many people in the UK realized that you should be careful what you wish for. That they had voted against the European Union, not perhaps on the merits of the case, but for a whole variety of reasons. And then in the cold light of day, they realized, hey, this is going to cost us a lot. And I think it has cost the UK a lot. And one of the costs has been, unfortunately, a rift in the relationship between the newly departed United Kingdom and the European Union. In other words, the separation was so difficult, so messy, and so bitter that it has taken some time since 2020 for both sides to get over it. But I think what's helping enormously is what's happening in the world. In other words, Putin's attack on Ukraine and the coming into office of the new Trump administration and the very strong negative position the Trump administration has taken toward Europe. And I think that has concentrated minds in Europe on both sides of the English Channel, in the UK and in the European Union, as a result of which the UK and the European Union are getting much, much closer together. It's interesting that it's Prime Minister Keir Starmer in the United Kingdom and President Macron in France who are leading the effort in Europe to have a coalition of the willing to help Ukraine. European Union leaders realize they can't do that without the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is, by European standards, is a leading military power. And the United Kingdom itself wants to be involved, realizes it can't do anything like that on its own. So what we've had is a coming together only in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I would say, or let's say 2 months, of the UK and the European Union, driven by geopolitical events, as I said, by what's happening in Ukraine, by what's happening in the United States. But the good thing is, I think finally, the UK and the European Union can get over the bitterness of Brexit and are saying to each other, all right, what do we need to do now to repair our relationship so that we can be stronger together on the European and global stage?
Right. It has become very obvious. And a lot of people felt this way even before the election, that Donald Trump was going to abandon Ukraine. He's come down definitely on the side of Russia. There's no doubt about it. And it looks like that he's not really going to provide much assistance to Ukraine unless something dramatic happened. The loss of the United States, and the U.S. isn't out completely, but a lot of people before, a lot of foreign policy analysts did not believe that the European countries could come together either under the banner of NATO or the EU and actually fill that void. Does it look more likely today that these countries, if they get united, and the UK has said they'll provide troops, aircraft, and really vital assets to Ukraine, do you think they can survive without the United States, even though the US now seems to be tacitly supporting Russia?
I think the Europeans, and I'm including, of course, the United Kingdom, in that. I think they can, but it's going to take time. It's going to take a long time. And if I were to fault the European Union, I would say that the Europeans should have anticipated this. But the thinking in Europe in the run-up to the recent presidential election in the United States and during the period after the election, but before Trump 2 took office, the feeling was, well, we got through the first Trump administration, we'll manage through the second Trump administration. Nobody anticipated in Europe how bad Trump 2.0 would be for Europe. And most recently, for instance, the imposition of 25% tariffs on car imports, that's going to hit Europe very, very hard. So it's not just the rhetoric, excuse me, of the new Trump administration. It's the reality, it's the actions of the new Trump administration that are so shocking. And I would say, Bill, that the effect has been not just to cause a crisis in transatlantic relations, because look, over the last 50, 60, 70 years, ever since the new transatlantic relationship, I mean, in the post-World War II period, it's had its ups and downs. There have been crises, there have been issues, and both sides have got over it. What we're seeing now is a fundamental shift. And what we're seeing by the Trump administration is an attack not on the relationship itself, but on the underlying transatlantic system. Because the transatlantic system, ever since the Second World War, ever since the Marshall Plan, ever since the establishment of NATO, ever since the establishment of the European Community, has been based on common values, shared values. It's hard to see or say that we have those shared values anymore. It was based on a common foundation for a prosperous transatlantic space based on trade liberalization and openness. Well, now we have 25% tariffs on car imports and other tariffs that is completely undermining the economic basis of the transatlantic system. And of course, when it comes to security, it's clear that the new Trump administration deeply distrusts NATO, is extremely critical of its European allies, and trusts Putin. Europeans can't understand how anybody would trust Putin after all that Putin has done. And not only, and obviously, his invasion of Ukraine, but his hybrid warfare that he has been launching against European countries and indeed against the United States for years now. So I think that the transatlantic relationship is not just under strain. I think the transatlantic system is falling apart. And I think Europeans realize they absolutely have to come together and they have to ensure their own security. But the reality is, given the disparity in military power between the United States and between Europe collectively, it's going to take a long time to be able to build up to that level of military power.
It certainly will. And of course, even though Trump denied he knew nothing about Project 2025, we all knew he did because he was touting it as the blueprint for his administration. But people who are wondering what Trump is going to do should just really read Project 2025, which is the ground rules for how he is going to operate. And we're going to come back in just a moment and talk about this. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a podcast, or you just have a computer, you like our shows, you would like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today, we're taking a look at an extremely important institution, and that is the European Union. My guest today is an expert. Dr. Desmond Dinan is a professor of public policy in the Schar School of Policy and Government and holds the Jean Monnet Chair in European Public Policy at George Mason University. His most recent book is A Concise History of the European Union. Dr. Dinan, let's pick up on where we left off a minute ago. Talk about these tariffs. I think you had an idea right before the break, and if you do, put that idea in, but talk about the tariffs and how they're actually detrimental to not only the Europeans, but to Americans and to people in many parts of the world.
Well, supply chains are so interconnected these days that it's impossible to say a car is European or Japanese or American because car parts travel, excuse me, all over the world. And the final assembly of any vehicle obviously takes place in one country or another, but that doesn't make the vehicle a Mexican car or an American car or a European car. So the idea of slapping very, very high tariffs on cars on the basis of where they are finally assembled and then shipped to the United States is extremely counterproductive for the United States itself, let alone, of course, for the countries where the final assembly takes place.
Yes, there's a myth in this country, and the media keep helping to promote it because they put the same lies out every day about tariffs. Donald Trump claims that the shipping country is going to bear the tariff. Now, in some cases, they may offset it a little bit, or the manufacturer may offset it, but the bottom line is that the customer is the one who pays that tariff. Is that not correct?
It is, of course, because as prices go up, the companies have a choice. They can either swallow the increasing cost or they can pass it on to their customers. And I think most businesses try to absorb as much of the shock as they can, because of course they don't want to lose customers. But there's a limit to what they can endure, and certainly 25% is a very, very high tariff. So what we are going to see is not just a dramatic increase in the cost of cars being imported into the United States from abroad and car parts coming into the United States from abroad, but so-called domestically produced automobiles, they'll increase in cost as well because much of what goes into those comes from countries outside of the United States. And the cost of those parts that come into the United States to complete the manufacture of a vehicle, they're going to increase by 25%, maybe less because, as I said, some Businesses will try to absorb some of that shock themselves, but they are going to increase. So what we're going to see is an increase generally in not just car prices, but prices overall in the United States as a result of this tariff policy. And this tariff policy of the Trump administration, it seems to lack any economic rationale because economically it's counterproductive. It seems to be a case of the president almost impulsively deciding that he's going to impose tariffs on this country, that country, or the other country. There seems to be no method whatsoever to what's happening right now.
There's certainly no logical economic theory behind it, that's for sure, or at least it seems that way, but you're absolutely right. While we're talking about, we're getting so many different damaging policies are underway in the United States that I can't, we're having to deviate from the script a bit, but let me ask you, what is the European view of America, who has over the years pretty much been a partner? We've not done everything right. We launched an illegal war in Iraq. We've done a variety of things that were not legal and were damaging to us and to other people. But what is their view of what's happening now with the Trump administration talking about our, quote, manifest destiny of taking Canada as the 51st state or absorbing Greenland because we want their minerals? That's exactly what we want. Or a gunboat diplomacy, which was reviled in Latin America for decades, a gunboat diplomacy of saying we're going to take the Panama Canal back. How do the Europeans view this in the broad sense of the word?
I think Europeans are shocked and dismayed. And if we come back to the European Union itself, the European Union was founded on the basis of democratic norms, democratic values, and also on multilateralism, and on a realization that given Europe's history and the world's history, countries shouldn't behave on the basis of might is right, of realpolitik, that it's beneficial to countries, it's in their interest to cooperate as closely as possible. That's the basis of the European Union. In fact, what's distinctive about the European Union is that its member states have not just formed a traditional international organization, they have established an entity, the European Union, that has elements of a country itself. It's a quasi-federal entity. They've given up aspects of their own sovereignty in order to share that for the benefit of the whole. And the Europeans thought perhaps that this model, which was so successful in the post-war period and the post-Cold War period, that it might gain traction. But what they see is a United States that is rejecting that completely and rejecting the norms and values and principles on which an entity like the European Union was founded, and going back to a 19th century model of international relations and state behavior, which anybody with even a modicum of knowledge of international history and world history in the 19th century will know what happened in the early 20th century and the mid 20th century. And so many Europeans, and there's a wide variety of opinions in Europe, of course, but I would say the majority of opinion in Europe is really shocked and dismayed and can't understand why the United States is doing this to itself, let alone why the United States is doing this to the rest of the world.
You hit the nail on the head. Every day, through weakening our institutions, killing off our soft power with the USAID, destroying the education department, we are weakening this country every day. And we're doing it to ourselves. And, you know, the big winner is China. Without a doubt, China is in the driver's seat now. Russia will never be in the driver's seat. They've got too many problems to deal with.
I agree.
But China is the big winner, and we're doing it to ourselves. And basically, we're surrendering. That's what it boils down to. Well, I'm sorry we deviated a bit, but we've got about 4 minutes left. Let me turn it over to you to talk about your book. Anything else that you want to talk about that we didn't get to it up to this point?
Well, thank you so much, Bill. I've written a number of books throughout my career. This book is a concise history of the European Union, and it's just that. It's concise, it's short. And you know, Bill, it's harder to write a short book than a long book. I've written many long books, but I wanted to it was almost an intellectual exercise. I wanted to draw on my long career, my long knowledge of my extensive knowledge of the European Union and of working with and in the European Union. And I wanted to synthesize as much as possible what it's all about. And I found that exercise fascinating. It was difficult. As I said, it was harder than writing a long book. It required considerable discipline because it meant I had to decide, well, what's really important here? What is the message that I want to convey? Who are the main characters or individuals driving European integration historically and more recently? What are the main factors? What does it mean for the transatlantic relationship, which we touched upon already? So I think I managed to get all of that into the book. But more than anything else, Bill, I tried to write in a lively and engaging way. It's difficult to do that when it comes to the European Union. And when I teach my courses on the European Union, I try to draw students in. I try to get them excited about a project that might seem to them to be, oh, very technocratic and dull. But it's not. It's absolutely fascinating. And more than that, it's really important for understanding Europe today and, I hope, transatlantic relations today.
It certainly is. I'm going to have to get a copy of this book. It sounds fascinating. It really does. Well, we
Thanks,
do
Bill.
have a little more time. One other topic that's coming up or will come up has been the use of cryptocurrency. There's a push, by the Trump administration to set up a crypto reserve. How have the Europeans dealt with this up to this point? A lot of people think crypto is nothing but a Ponzi scheme. That's all it is. It may have a few redeeming virtues, but not very many. But how have they dealt with it, and how should we in the US deal with it?
Well, I'm going to disappoint you a little because I'm not an expert on that subject, but I would agree with you that there is, I would call it profound skepticism on the European side. There are no proposals or initiatives to develop cryptocurrency in the same, as an official currency, if you like, in the same way that it's even being discussed in the United States. Maybe that reflects a more cautious European approach generally to public policy and new initiatives, and some people might be critical of that. But caution is not such a bad thing, especially I think when it comes to something like cryptocurrency, which is so unproven and which seems to be, I would certainly not say at the root of, but whenever it comes to rather dubious international financial dealings, it's not unusual that cryptocurrency is involved somehow.
That's very true. And it's not surprising, too, that so many of the crypto leaders have gone to jail. They're,
Right.
they're involved in all kinds of illegal activities and what have you. But that's very true. Well, before we leave, you mentioned something a minute ago. Now, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is a military self-defense operation to defend Europe, basically, from a variety of dangers and what have you. And the European Union is an economic social commission. You mentioned that the EU is arming, they're starting to look at developing
Yes.
arms. How is that going to work? And what exactly is that?
Well, they have to really, because there's so much uncertainty about NATO's future and the European Union and its members feel, well, we have this organization already with 27 countries. We cooperate so closely in every other policy field. Let's move into the field of security and defense. So what the European Union is doing in that regard is, on the one hand, improving defense procurement in Europe, because the defense industry is segregated amongst the different European countries. So why not have a single integrated European defense marketplace? There is already an integrated marketplace for other economic sectors. Defense was excluded. So what the European Union is doing is bringing defense into that in order to rationalize the procurement sector and the defense industry. And the second thing is organizing a military capacity or a military response. Already, the European Union participates in peacekeeping, peacemaking operations around the world on a pretty small scale. But they want to ramp that up because they realize if there is a peace settlement in Ukraine, Ukraine is going to need credible security guarantees. I mean, Putin will sign whatever he needs to sign to get what he wants, but he can't be trusted. Europeans know that. So they know that if Ukraine is to survive in the post-Ukraine war world, it's going to need credible security guarantees. Clearly, it's not going to get those from the United States. It has to get them from Europe. So European countries are meeting regularly to discuss and decide, how can we do that? How can we do that either in the context of the European Union or on an ad hoc basis, including non-EU countries, especially the UK and Norway?
That is very important, and the European countries have to come together and figure out a collective strategy to offset the loss of the United States, because at least while this president's here, you cannot expect much support from him and his administration. So that's a very, very important. But Dr. Desmond Dinan, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Bill, thank you so much. It was a great pleasure.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.